So you can't help but find great irony in this. Number two, a huge breakthrough. A huge breakthrough. IAEA weapons inspectors Iran has agreed to them. Yeah. Just like they did under Barack Obama, just like they were doing until Donald Trump kicked them out and blew up the deal in his first term. Number three, Iran agrees, Caddy, write this down, this is big.
It's a new one.
That they will not build nuclear weapons. They've been saying that, I think, since before nuclear weapons were even invented. So again, no breakthrough there. We did get some insight on the idea about the unfreezing of the funds. Obviously, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, a lot of Republicans on the Hill, I will say myself included, also very concerned about the hundreds of billions of dollars going their way, the $100 billion or so dollars, according to the Wall Street Journal, in unfrozen funds that would be going their way. You have J.D. Vance talking about a deal that Jared Kushner is working out where the United States would manage those unfrozen funds to make sure that the funds were spent on supplies for the Iranian people from the United States there. The devil's in the details, obviously. And finally, just the laughable statement that Donald Trump's not going to just sit back and take trash talk from people. Again, they were talking about a man who has said he would destroy Iranian civilization. And this weekend, I think several times said he was going to destroy the country and kill the negotiators if they didn't do what he wanted to say. All of that, a lot of noise. I do think it's this deconfliction idea is a positive idea if they want to at least keep the talks open. But I will say at the center of this remains an Iran that is going to continue to enrich. And that's going to be something that Israel and Republicans will never be satisfied with.
Yeah, I think you're right on the deconfliction idea. And we heard the president over the weekend say in an interview, look, to Netanyahu, you don't need to destroy a building every time you see somebody walk into it. He clearly wants some sense of proportionality around that. On the nuclear weapons, yes, they've always said that. The inspectors, wow, who knew that could be a thing. The money for farmers, this war has been great because there will be money for farmers, suddenly for American farmers growing soybeans and wheat. I mean, maybe. Let's see the details on this. I think the other problems are that they're going to get money anyway from selling oil immediately and the sanctions relief that comes with that. Right. And that doesn't seem to be tied to wheat and soybeans from American farmers. So that is where people are assuming they're going to rebuild certainly their ballistic missiles program. And a pause in their nuclear program isn't terrible for them because they have so much rubble to sort through. What I have been told is that actually they quite like the idea of a pause while they reconstitute. But they've still got the know-how, they've still got the scientists, they've still got the ability to push ahead with a nuclear program whenever they want. And this idea that the Middle East has been a basket case and somehow this war has made it less vulnerable to conflict, I think is what people in the international security space would find, frankly, laughable. I had a long conversation last night with somebody who looks specifically at arms control issues around the Middle East, and what they are saying is the Saudis are going to be stepping up their conversations with Islamabad over their own nuclear ambitions. The rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia that has emerged because of this war in Iran, or accelerated because of the war in Iran, inherently makes the region more unstable. Israel's activities of, frankly, ethnic cleansing in the West Bank make the region more unstable as well as what is happening with Hezbollah and Israel. So I think J.D. Vance stands up there and tells a very good tale, but when you look at this administration, there is very little evidence in history of strategic follow-through and technical, detail-orientated follow-through that this would take to actually produce something that looked more like a stable Middle East because of what's happened over the last 4 months.
Yeah, saying the Trump administration does not often possess a real follow-through is quite the understatement there, Caddy. This is certainly a difficult task for Vice President Vance here. He's made the face of these negotiations. And, Richard, we saw a lot of really positive spin there, including using the phrase classic Trump deal more times than I can count. But sift through it here. Set aside the spin. What stood out to you about what does sound like progress, and also what parts feel like, well, a long way to go?
Well, any statement about nuclear weapons and pledges are just that. They're words, they're intentions. Those are meaningless. The idea of establishing a deconfliction hotline, essentially, potentially good. Those sorts of mechanisms have served well in other issues, like with the U.S. and Soviet Union. So potentially that's good. Inspectors, getting that back in is essential because Iran will have the ability to carry out some nuclear activities. There will be some right to enrich. But inspectors is a really complicated thing. They can't look under every roof in the country. In order for inspectors to succeed, they need a degree of cooperation from the host country. There has to be a mechanism when if we have intelligence and we say we want the inspectors to go there, well, what happens when Iran says no? And they says that's espionage. So to allow inspectors in is not the end of it. It's necessary, but it's the beginning of it. So this will be an incredibly elaborate, not just negotiation, but then implementation. This will never stop being, shall we say, an area of friction between the United States and Iran, Israel and Iran. And I think more broadly, what this tells you is, well, is what I was saying before the J.D. Vance started talking. When you get a memorandum like this, a memorandum of understanding that's so vague and so short, it ensures, it guarantees that the implementation is really 99% of the work. So you can't be optimistic yet. All you can be is say, here's what we hope. But every single issue, the strait's going to be closed at various times. We know that. Tolls are going to be charged. What's this new Iran-Oman mechanism going to insist on? The nuclear issue and all that. What about the issues not covered by this? The ballistic missiles, the drone factories, the proxies. The idea that you could give Iran some money and that wouldn't go directly to the proxy. Well, it doesn't have to. It frees money up to go to the proxies. Yeah. So no one should kid themselves that this is, if you will, we got the prerequisites of stability. This is not a peace agreement. Never forget that.
Yeah, and also, let's just, if you're looking at all this and trying to sort through it all, here's what you need to understand. Iran is not going to denuclearize. They are going to continue enriching. That's number one.
Point of pride for them.
Number one, point of pride. And also, they're going to be richer after this war. That is an objective fact. You can look at the MOU and how everything's been laid out. If the Trump administration does what the Trump administration says it's going to do, then they literally have achieved none of their goals, because their top goal was no nukes in Iran. You'll notice it's very interesting. J.D. Vance, when he started talking, he talked about denuclearization of Iran. Then he corrected himself because he understood that he had stepped over a red line that the Iranian negotiators had set. They are going to continue to enrich. So then he backed up and said, oh, no weapons. And so when he stepped back over that red line, he was in the place where the Obama administration, where the Bush administration, where every administration has been. Iran is going to continue to enrich. So what have we gotten out of this war? Well, a deal that's going to make Iran a lot richer. And it's just because John Heilemann, here's the deal. The Iranians aren't going to back down from that red line. And the problem for the Trump administration is the fact that if they continue enriching, then you will have the Israelis who they've already said, well, we're not going to let them continue enriching. We're not going to let them get a weapon. We don't trust them. We're going to continue our war against Iran. And then on Donald Trump's right flank in the United States, Republican senators, Republican members of the House, Republican thought leaders, the New York Post editorial page, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, on and on and on. Those people will also say, wait a second, you've got a deal that's actually worse than the Obama deal. They're continuing their nuclear program. You're just making them a lot richer. So we're in a bit of a bind here, is a good understatement. And Then, of course, and I'll let you take this, you had the projection and confession about, quote, trash talk between these two parties. Go.
Well, I mean, Joe, to your point, to your first set of points, the thing that I find to the bind that the administration finds itself in, the thing that you have to remind people of when you hear J.D. Vance at the end trying to say in that press conference, try to say, well, yes, if we get to a final agreement, we are going to unfreeze hundreds of billions of dollars in Iranian assets, but Jared Kushner's come up with a plan where they're going to have to use it to buy our soybeans, right? Even if that were not a fanciful notion, and the notion that the Qataris and the United States are somehow going to manage how Iran spends the dollars that they get when they get their unfrozen assets, and that they're only going to go back to American farmers, even if that was a tenable arrangement, which it's almost certainly not. Money, Joe, as you know, is fungible. So if the Iranians are going to be bringing in oil revenue from the oil that they're selling, revenue from the strait that they now, as they toll ships going through there, if they are put in a position where they have to use some of their assets in some notional on paper way to buy American agricultural products, it still leaves them with, it just frees up the money from the other sources of funds that they have. They're still on net richer than they were before the day that the war started. And that's the thing that we have to keep our eye on the ball here, which is, as of now, under any scenario, is Iran better off today than it was before the war started, or is it worse off? I don't see a scenario in which it's not better off.